Hey there, good morning everyone. Meteorologist Jim Dickey here in the ABC7 Weather Center with another edition of Tracking the Tropics. Our second Tracking the Tropics video before the hurricane season even starts here. Of course, last week, Arthur formed, fell apart, brought some rain to the Carolinas, came very close to landfall near Cape Hatteras, but stayed just offshore, did bring some soaking rain there, as I said. And now we're tracking another system. Same system that brought plenty of rainfall to South Florida going back through the past 24 to 48 hours. Now, as we look at the satellite presentation this morning, two features I want to point out to you on it. First of all, in the western Gulf, the larger circle I have, a little upper level low swirling out there, sort of what's fueled this whole thing so far. That upper level disturbance helping to drag that tropical moisture into South Florida and produce broad low pressure at the surface. Well, now, as I loop this for you again, near Cape Canaveral, and it's tough to make out on this type of satellite presentation this early in the morning. There's a little bit of turning starting to show up there on the satellite now, and a little blow-up of thunderstorm activity. If something is going to try to come together out of this, it will be from that little area that I have highlighted right there. So a different look at this. This is our moisture tracker. I'm showing you something called precipitable water. Tropical moisture, really. And that deep area of red, that's the moisture feed going into that upper level feature I have marked there in the western Gulf of Mexico too. All that moisture was over Florida yesterday, why there was so much rainfall to be had. Well, now that's lifting north, and as it does, again, you note the little bit of turning with the winds there by the east coast of Florida. So for something like this to develop into a proper tropical system, for that area of low pressure to become a tropical depression or tropical storm, you need a couple things to come together. You need warm waters, tropical moisture. We have that. I just showed that to you. You need low wind shear. What I mean by that is sort of calm conditions as you go up in the atmosphere. And then you need time for everything to sort of come together and spin up. Well, we definitely have the warm waters, as this is moving right out over the Gulf Stream, that current of water that comes out of the Gulf and goes up the east coast. You see I have 81 degrees marked there just to the east of Florida. You can make out that area of orange, tracing out that squiggly line going up the coast of the Carolinas that is the Gulf Stream. And when systems set up over that, they have a better chance of coming together with that locally warmer water. And then there's the wind shear. Generally speaking, in the month of May, the jet stream's still fairly far south, but there's going to be lots of wind shear out there across the Atlantic Basin. Still the case right now, though there's this little pocket of lower shear over the Bahamas where the system is trying to come together. So not impossible in this setup that something could try to spin up. But what this isn't going to have, I think, is enough time to come together. So as you go through our storm tracker model, yes, we have a little bit of low pressure forming up. You see how that sort of closes off into a little swirl here, just off to the east of Jacksonville by the time we get to 4 o'clock this afternoon, this evening. But that quickly pushes to the north. I think by the time we get to midnight tonight, really, this is moving over land. So again, I just don't think this has quite enough time to come together. If this was moving a little more slowly and had a day or so to sit out there over the Gulf Stream, perhaps we're talking a depression or a weak tropical storm coming together. But the chance for this is low. This is from the Hurricane Center. They admit freely development with this unlikely. A 20% chance. I still think it's going to bring the potential for some flooding rainfall, though, to parts of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, just like we saw some flooding rainfall in South Florida going back through Memorial Day and back into Sunday. There's the Europeans sort of putting a bullseye with the rainfall in eastern Georgia, about 8 inches there, and then a band of rain stretching towards the Outer Banks, about 1 to 2 inches. So we're not talking widespread flooding with this, not a huge impact event, but going to be sort of a nasty day of weather there for the southeast coast going through today. And this goes all the way through Friday, going through today, tomorrow, and improving by Thursday. Now, something else I want to talk about briefly here. We have something setting up. So I feel like we get this to set up a couple times throughout the hurricane season. In particular, I feel like usually during the early part of the season, May, June, and then the late part of the season, October, November, this is when we tend to watch this take form. It's called the Central American Gyre. And what we have is we have our easterly trade winds setting up into the Caribbean, broad easterly flow, and then you go south of Central America into the eastern Pacific, and you have broad easterly winds. Well, between those two flow regimes, you can imagine a little bit of a counterclockwise swirl going. Broad cyclonic flow, it's called. Basically, this is a breeding ground for low pressure. And so models tend to want to spin up low pressure areas within this. You're in the tropics, so we tend to occasionally see a tropical system form up. But usually these are phantom systems that appear on the models that don't necessarily pan out in real life. This is what the European forecast model does with it. So we have our broad cyclonic flow, and now you have a broad area of low pressure forming up in the Pacific. That sort of comes together, coalesces, and the European develops what appears to be a tropical system moving into southern Mexico next week. Now, the whole reason I'm discussing this is because the GFS, or American model in particular, does not do a very good job of handling these scenarios. And as such, if you follow various meteorologists or weather enthusiasts on social media, you may be seeing some posts over the next couple of days about the GFS putting out something in the Southwest Caribbean, perhaps the Gulf of Mexico, next week. Again, this is because it's not doing a good job of picking up on how storms come together in this Central American gyre. In fact, the GFS model is doing the same thing the European does, where it forms it over or south of Central America in the Pacific, then it brings it across Central America and into the Atlantic. That's not going to happen. Now, is it possible that something sloppy, some weak low pressure area could emerge from this late next week, 2 weekends from now, 2 weeks from now, and emerge into the Gulf of Mexico? Sure. It's something we'll be watching for, but that's why we'll be in hurricane season. And once hurricane season gets going, of course, we watch anything that tries to move its way into this part of the world. But I think at this point, the chances are low. Just beware of what you're seeing on social media of models being put out because there is no imminent threats at this point in time. Just something that we'll be keeping an eye on over the next week to 2 weeks. So some takeaways here. Yes, we're going to keep an eye on that low off the coast of Florida. Something could briefly try to spin up before it moves over the Carolinas going through the next 24 hours. If it would take a name, that name would be Bertha, but that is a low chance. It will bring that soaking rain, like I said, to the southeast, and then we'll watch the Southwest Caribbean, that Central American gyre, going through next week. Perhaps something weak, sloppy could try to form up, but at this point, the chances for that look fairly low. Of course, I'll be back with more next week, another edition of Tracking the Tropics. Hurricane season officially beginning on Monday. So what I'd like to do, barring anything trying to come together, is I will break down the various forecasts here for the upcoming season. And in case you haven't heard, it does look like it's going to be a busy year in the Atlantic. So stay tuned for that. Until then, a meteorologist, Jim Dickey. Have a good day.